In 985, Emperor Basil II deposed his uncle and former advisor, Basil Lakapenos. Having been the power behind the throne for over a decade, while his two nephews ruled in name only, the old eunuch had no intentions of retiring soon. But Lakapenos had sensed early on that young Basil II aspired to govern himself. Alarmed by the ambition of the legitimate emperor as much as Lakapenos, the aristocracy of Asia Minor began conspiring with the eunuch. The so-called Anatolian dynasty, or the powerful ones, rallied behind the general who had helped the two Basils crush a revolt in the late 970s. Now bearing the title of Domestikos of the Schools, the illustrious commander Bardas Phocas held command over all of Asia Minor and posed a severe challenge to the rule of the young Macedonian emperor. However, before long, young Basil uncovered his uncle's attempts to create an anti-imperial coalition. The old Lakapenos was condemned and exiled, and for once Basil II held a firm grip over the empire's affairs. Yet soon, the tide would turn against the young emperor, and the Byzantine world would be engulfed in a vicious civil strife. Having hoped that his first Bulgarian expedition would bolster his reputation, Basil's military inexperience achieved the exact opposite. The emperor's position couldn't have been more precarious after the debacle at the Trajan's gates in August 986. Worse, after the deposition of his uncle, the emperor was bold enough to demote several influential officials. Most importantly, Bardas Phocas, who now, at least on paper, commanded only the city of Antioch and its surroundings. However, the entirety of Asia Minor was loyal to their former commander. Joining Phocas's anti-loyalist camp were Leo Melicinos, whose hasty retreat had caused a disaster at Trajan's gate, and the former governor of Italy, a man named Delphinus. Around the same time, Bardas Skleros, the former rival of Bardas Phocas, arrived in Meliten from Baghdad. This time, however, the old general was here on the invite of Phocas. The two men had negotiated a truce, and Skleros soon headed towards Cappadocia, where his small force of Arab tribesmen and Armenians could link with Phocas's large army. Upon arriving in Caesarea, however, old Skleros was captured and imprisoned. Having eliminated a potential threat to his power, Bardas Phocas proclaimed himself emperor in August 987 and headed towards the Marmara Sea. The commander divided his armies into two. He planned to blockade the Dardanelles with his part of the army, while the second half, commanded by Delphinus, was to head towards the Asian shore of the Dardanelles. But the ponderous march of the two anti-loyalist forces, combined with their inability to achieve naval supremacy, gave Basil enough time to plan a course of action carefully. Having 2/3 of his empire turned against him, the young emperor had no other choice but to seek foreign aid. As Delphinus and his men encamped near Chrysopolis, Basil entered negotiations with the son of the great Svetoslav, a certain Prince Vladimir, who just so happened to be interested in converting his people, the Rus, to Orthodox Christianity. Vladimir agreed to help Basil in return for his sister's hand in marriage, the very same one that had been promised to the Bulgarian nobleman Aron. Securing a wedding with a princess from the Macedonian dynasty was a feat that even the Holy Roman emperors couldn't achieve. This secured him military aid from Vladimir in the form of 6,000 battle-hardened Slavs and Scandinavians who headed for the Golden Horn to join Basil's army. Although marrying off his sister to a foreign heathen may have been a blow to the family's prestige, the emperor knew that the balance of the civil war and his place on the throne hung on this union. By December 988, an army of 6,000 battle-hardened Slavs and Scandinavians, anchored in the Golden Horn. In the meantime, Phocas, who had unsuccessfully tried to secure Abydos, headed towards Chrysopolis, leaving Leo Melicinos behind in charge of the siege. However, before the general could reach far, Basil, now reinforced by his new elite Scandinavian guard, crossed the Dardanelles and headed towards the enemy camp. On an early January morning, a squadron of Basil's men sprayed the shore near Delphinus's base with Greek fire, denying the anti-loyalists a way out. Basil's main army quickly routed their challengers in a short and decisive clash. Delphinus was impaled alive in what would become the first of Basil's many gruesome punishments. In the meantime, a small loyalist army led by the Armenian Gregory Taranites ravaged the rebel-controlled territories. But upon reaching the Euphrates River, the Armenians were defeated by Phocas's son, who commanded an army of fresh recruits, generously delivered by the Georgian kingdom of Tau. Unfortunately for Nikephoros Phocas, when rumors of the defeat at Chrysopolis spread throughout Anatolia, his men deserted en masse, returning to their Georgian homeland. In the meantime, the self-proclaimed emperor, Phocas, had returned to his camp near Abydos, intensifying the city's siege. By April, Basil and his army had already landed nearby, and Bardas had no choice but to face the young emperor in battle. However, at the very beginning of the ensuing clash, Phocas suffered a seizure, immediately dying. News of their commander's demise spread mass panic among the Anatolian army. Phocas's soldiers immediately broke their formation. Hotly pursued by imperial squadrons and routed bit by bit, much of the rebel force was crushed then and there on the 13th of April, in front of Abydos. With that victory, Basil had secured his position on the throne. In an unusual display of mercy, much of the rebel command, including Leo Melicinos, lived to see another day. Basil's dealings in Anatolia weren't over, however. In Cappadocia, Skleros was released from captivity and put in charge of the rebellion. Old and half-blind, the senior general secured a truce with Basil, ending the revolt and retiring in Thrace. The final holdout of the rebellion, the city of Antioch, surrendered soon after. With the rebellion crushed, Basil led a campaign against the king of Tau, David III, who had supported Phocas's revolt. Furthermore, the old monarch had used the chaos of the civil war to put his nephew Bagrat on the throne of the neighboring kingdom of Abkhazia. David had named his relative an heir to his kingdom, meaning that the two Georgian kingdoms of Tau and Abkhazia were to merge upon his death. This troubled Basil II, who forced King David to accept his peace terms after a brief and poorly recorded campaign. The old monarch was to keep his crown on one significant condition. Basil was to be adopted by David and named heir to his kingdom. And thus, almost effortlessly, Basil had secured the incorporation of an entirely new province, the size of Cilicia. By late 989, the emperor had already returned to Constantinople. Now he could finally focus on what would become his life's work: restoring the old Balkan provinces of the empire and defeating Samuel of Bulgaria once and for all. Slowed down by a year due to an earthquake in Constantinople, Basil finally departed for Bulgaria in 991. The emperor's strategy was to spend as much time as possible in Bulgaria's heartland, Macedonia. Reinforced by his small Varangian army and a massive regular army, the emperor invaded Bulgaria. Instead of inflicting a single crippling defeat on Samuel, the Romans relied on a more time-consuming but less risky course of action: gradually reducing Bulgarian strongholds in Macedonia over the course of many months. On the other hand, Samuel decided to leave only a tiny defensive force in Bulgaria, knowing that the rugged terrain of Macedonia would do much of the defense for him, and decided on an offensive strategy. He besieged and captured Byzantine strongholds around Thessaloniki, Dyrrhachium, and Thessaly. However, Basil's initiative in Macedonia was marked by great success. By 992, much of western Macedonia was in Byzantine hands. The major stronghold of Varia was reconquered, and Bulgaria's eunuch, Tsar Roman, was captured during a minor confrontation. As you may remember from our previous episode, Roman was the brother of Boris II, who had been arrested and dethroned by Emperor John Zimisces in 971. The two brothers had escaped from Byzantine captivity. However, only the castrated Roman had made it to Sredets, where he was proclaimed Emperor of Bulgaria. Roman's title was mostly symbolic, as many of the roles of a monarch were filled by Samuel. Sources are dubious about Roman's fate after his capture in 991. Some claim that the Bulgarian Tsar died in captivity, while others state that the Tsar was handed out a governorship in Anatolia, the latter being more likely. After the successes of 991, Basil continuously wintered in Bulgaria for the next 3 years, gradually capturing fortress after fortress. In the meantime, Samuel's offensive efforts also proved fruitful, with the Bulgarians seizing multiple border strongholds, including the major city of Dyrrhachium. In the end, luck turned out to be on Samuel's side, when disturbing news from the east forced Basil to return and winter in Constantinople in late 994. While Basil was gradually reducing Bulgarian control over Macedonia, a war over the Byzantine vassal emirate of Aleppo was in full motion. This conflict had ended poorly for Basil's Duke of Antioch, an old general named Michael Bortzes. In the years prior, the emperor had refused to appoint another Domestikos of the East, fearing another rebellion. Instead, Basil delegated the duties of protecting the Asian frontier to the Duke of Antioch. This made for a sluggish Byzantine reaction to significant eastern threats, as Bortzes had to turn directly to Constantinople for assistance. The Fatimid Caliph Al-Aziz exploited this situation, vigorously attempting to transform the Emirate of Aleppo into yet another province in his transcontinental empire. To accomplish this task, the Caliph appointed Manu Takin, one of his most talented generals, as governor of Damascus. Starting in 992, the Turkic general would frequently invade the Arab Emirate of Aleppo, defeating General Bortzes in 2 encounters and capturing the major fortress of Apamea. Yet, Aleppo's residents vigorously resisted Takin's attempts to siege their capital city. After spending the winter of 993 and 994 in Damascus, the Fatimid general assembled a large force, planning on capturing Aleppo and repelling the city's Christian allies once and for all. Reinforced by a party led by Leo Melisinos, the Duke of Antioch's enlarged army of close to 10,000 was still no match for Manu Takin's force, which in all probability was several times larger. Realizing his position, Bortzes and Leo marched south to the stronghold of Anartus. The Byzantine army was reinforced by a garrison sent from Aleppo, which linked with the main force en route. After drawing local recruits from the area around Anartus, Bortzes felt confident enough to engage Manu Takin's force. The Fatimid general reacted quickly, leaving a small party behind to continue the ongoing siege of Aleppo, while he moved to intercept the Romans. By September, the two armies had neared each other. Michael Bortzes and Melisinos had taken position next to a ford on the Orontes River. Manu Takin's multi-ethnic force assembled on the opposite bank. Supposedly, Baucis was able to position his men better. Despite that, the Fatimids eventually gained the initiative. Separated from the main Byzantine army, a contingent of Aleppan recruits faced a Fatimid squadron of Bedouins and Berbers located on the opposite bank. This section of the battlefield was the first to see action, as the Berbers crossed a ford and charged straight at their fellow Muslims. Frightened by the overwhelming enemy numbers, the Aleppans fled, exposing the Byzantine rear. In the meantime, Baucis' main force had engaged Manu Takin's men. Unfortunately for the Romans, the Berbers abstained from pursuing the fleeing Aleppans, instead choosing to assist their general. Soon the Byzantines were struck on two sides. Having already lost as many as 5,000 men, the Duke of the East ordered a retreat, fleeing towards his base in Antioch. This victory enabled the Fatimids to continue their siege on Aleppo. Manu Takin had no plans of lifting the blockade anytime soon. The Turkic general prepared to winter in enemy territory. He was supposedly so dedicated to conquering the city that he ordered the construction of baths and bazaars within his camp. Realizing the severity of the situation, the emperor, who had just arrived in Constantinople, began planning a course of action. A potential fall of Aleppo would open the gates for a Fatimid conquest of Antioch, erasing 3 centuries of Byzantine progress in the area. Yet Basil was no longer an inexperienced prince. The past 10 years had transformed him into an imposing figure, and in the coming spring, the emperor would have an opportunity to showcase his abilities again. If you stayed around this far, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment as a sacrifice to the algorithm. You can also support us on Patreon and get ad-free early access to our videos for as little as $1, or by clicking the thanks button below to leave a one-time tip. As always, we'll see you in the next one.